for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. My name is Darren Gibson, and I'm your co-host.
And I'm Katy Steele, helping out for Jack Prince.
Yes, and actually, I didn't tell you, Jack called me this morning on the way down to your place.
How's Jack doing?
He's doing okay. He's got some good days, and he's got some bad days. But we're hoping that he'll be returning to the show real soon. But we've got a lot of topics to talk about today, including the SS or Bortec, whatever you want to call them, coming down to your neighborhood to start rounding up protesters and basically ripping up the Constitution right in front of your eyes. And a lot of people don't even realize that it's happening.
Yeah, there's people actually that are pushing for it. They're like, we don't even need judges in courts.
Yeah, well, yeah, and those are usually the same people that say, well, I bought these guns to fight the government tyranny, and now the government's being tyrannical. Oh, go ahead, because I don't like those people.
I forgot to use these.
Yeah. We've got some mass stories as well, and we got a couple of wild off-the-cuff stories for the end of the show, so stick around for that. Before we get into our stories today, I have a couple of quick reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime you like at Spreaker.com. Do a search for Southpaws there. You can find us at the iTunes Store. Just search for Southpaws under Podcasts. Once you've found our logo, you've found us. Links to our podcast are sent automatically to our Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube page. Go to youtube.com and search for Southpaws Radio there. And, of course, you can find us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI-FM in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and Global Community Radio Channel 1. We're on every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Make sure you listen to us there as well. Before we get into topics, a quick shout-out. Longtime listener of ours, Bob Tart. My birthday is coming up in the next couple of weeks or so. I shamelessly plugged, hey, I was looking for a particular type of cloth mask to wear over my N95. And Bob reached out to me and said, hey, what do you want for your birthday? I said, you don't have to get me anything. He's like, no, I'm serious. I said, well, he was insisting on sending a gift card. So he sent me a gift card to Barnes & Noble, and I got a couple of books from there just this week, and I want to give a shout-out to Bob for doing that. Before I tell you what books I bought, Bob is an author as well, and you can find his books at Barnes & Noble, books including Kitty Cornered, Feather-Brained, Foul Weather. Just make sure you look for Bob Tarte, this Tarte. Fantastic guy. Yeah, I ended up purchasing Too Much and Not Enough, the Mary Trump book.
Ooh.
And then I bought another book, and we might as well talk about this one a little bit. It's a book called Underwater. And let me go to this. This is Larry Getlin writing for the New York Post. Okay. Of all places, they're owned by News Corporation, Fox Propaganda Channel.
They're going to be underwater too, though.
Yep. This article is dated July 18th. One morning in 2012, Phoenix real estate developer Jeff Jacobs was playing golf when he got a surprising phone call. One of his employees, trying to bid on a house they wanted at auction, told him the price had reached their agreed-upon ceiling of $85,000, a rare occurrence since they usually snagged the homes they wanted without competition. Jacobs told his employee to go up to $87,000, but the price kept rising. Quote, the price jumped to $90,000, then $95,000. The home wound up selling for about $100,000, end of quote. That comes directly from Ryan December's new book, Underwater, How Our American Dream of Home Ownership Became a Nightmare.
You're trying to make me this mad this early in the morning, huh?
Oh, yes.
I am seething right now.
By the way, December is a journalist with the Wall Street Journal. Again, another News Corp property, which is really shocking. A, that he wrote this book, and B, that News Corp allowed him to publish the book. And this is the other book that I got a copy of. I haven't started reading it yet, but
I cannot wait to hear it, and you need to pass it along when you're done.
Oh, I will. Believe me. Once I get through it, I'm planning on reaching out to Ryan to have him come on the show and talk about it a little bit.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yep. Here's what else the book said. Quote, Jacobs was bewildered. Who was this aggressive bidder? By the end of the day, he had a name. The bidder was from an outfit called Invitation Homes. End of quote. Invitation Homes, it turned out, was owned by Blackstone Group, the world's largest real estate investor. Created after a company called Treehouse Group was folded into Blackstone, then renamed in 2012, Invitation Homes was on a $10 billion shopping spree, purchasing $150 million worth of houses per week. Here's what December wrote as well. Quote, at an auction in Sacramento, a house flipper named Ryan Heck was bewildered by a bidder who bought every house that hit the block. End of quote. December noted that the bidder went $1 over every other bid until the other bidders conceded. Quote, neither Heck nor the other regulars recognized the dollar over guy. It turned out he was with an out-of-town concern called Treehouse and had instructions to buy everything that cost less than what it would cost to build a similar house. Every house auctioned that day fit the bill. End of quote. Moving forward, Heck tried to compete, sometimes even peeking over other builders' shoulders to run the dollar over routine on them, but he was outmatched. December writes this in his book, quote, he had a handful of cashier's checks. The new guys had duffel bags full. End of quote. Underwater describes how, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, corporations began buying suburban homes en masse and then renting them out, often for more than residents would have otherwise paid in rent or mortgage. This has become so common that, while the phenomenon didn't exist a decade ago, corporations bought 1 out of every 10 suburban homes sold in 2018. Corporate home ownership can not only subject tenants to higher living costs, but often destroys their ability to buy these homes themselves as companies pay top dollar to take them off the market. As a result, America is quickly becoming a renter nation. December writes in his book, quote, between 2006 and 2016, when the home ownership rate fell to its lowest level in 50 years, the number of renters grew by about a quarter. End of quote. While he notes the companies own around 300,000 U.S. homes so far, this is just the tip of the iceberg, as they're wealthy enough to buy and tech-savvy enough to manage multiples more with ruthless efficiency. These companies aren't just depriving potential homeowners of a place to call their own. He writes that they're destroying the ability for thousands of middle-class American families to accumulate wealth. Which, I'm going to stop there for a quick second. Yeah, what's the biggest thing you're ever going to buy in your life? Your house. So when they start running up the prices, it just makes it more and more impossible for the working guy or gal to buy a house.
Oh, and that is just the beginning of this story. And that is because this is Blackstone, you said, right?
They're a real estate developer, yes.
Right, yeah. They're not the only ones that are doing this. And, yeah, from what I'm seeing, these are the same homes that they're using right now to, they're occupied by officers who are helping to do the remodeling and the flipping work while they're surveilling the neighborhood.
Yeah. We'll continue a little bit here. December writes in Underwater, quote, home price appreciation has historically been how Americans achieve financial prosperity. Unlike stocks and bonds, ownership of which is concentrated at the top, houses are widely held. Roughly half of housing wealth is owned by America's middle class. End of quote. The bonanza really took off in 2011 when Morgan Stanley issued a report called A Rentership Society. With over 1.6 million foreclosed homes in the United States and more on the way, The report forecast, quote, a surge in the number of renters and a potentially massive opportunity for investors to convert the glut of repossessed homes into rental properties, end of quote. Again, that is a Morgan Stanley report from 2011. America's investment managers were all in. By 2012, quote, more than $1 billion had been raised by investors for the purpose of doing just that. Some of the biggest names in finance were hoarding houses, end of quote. Individual investors were soon mostly gone or absorbed into larger companies with investors like Warren Buffett, KKR of Barbarians at the Gate fame, and investment behemoth the Carlyle Group. KKR is Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts, which was involved in the junk bond market back in the 80s and into the 90s. As a matter of fact, KKR at one point owned WZZM 13. But quickly sold it because they didn't know what they were doing in the media business, my opinion. Continuing the story, Heck himself wound up joining American Homes for Rent, which was founded by billionaire self-storage magnate B. Wayne Hughes, and would own about 48,000 houses by the end of 2016. There's even a lobbying organization, the National Rental Home Council, to look after their interests in the government, such as defeating rent control laws. So, once again, it's the rich. The rich don't care about you. They own you. They own everything, as George Carlin has said in the past. Continuing real quickly, as the industry grew, foreclosure auctions in certain cities became major affairs. The first Tuesday of every month is auction day throughout Georgia, and corporate home buyers fly in for what was known among investors as Super Tuesday. December writes, quote, Heck and others of B. Wayne's bidders would gather at a Sheraton hotel the evening before and divvy up $20 million or so of cashier's checks. End of quote. Their mission was to buy homes near good schools that families would feel comfortable in, nothing older than 20 years or smaller than 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The industry's ideal buyer was well defined. December notes that a company called Progress Residential, which owned about 20,000 homes, sought to provide, quote, an aspirational living experience to tenants who were typically about 38 years old and married with a child or two, annual income of about $88,000, less than stellar FICO credit scores around 665, and a hobbling $45,000 of debt. If they wanted to live the middle-class lifestyle to which they were accustomed, they'd have to rent, end of quote.
And as soon as things took a turn for the worse, they would lose everything.
Mm-hmm. Buying foreclosed homes had its pitfalls, as buyers couldn't see inside the homes before the purchase. While occasionally they'd get a treat like marble countertops, often the surprises were more horrific. December writes, quote, there were wild stories, a corpse in the Carolinas, basement marijuana farms, a turnover crew that renovated the wrong house in California, surprising a family just back from vacation with a new kitchen, and news that their possessions were in a landfill, end of quote. So they're not even bothering to make sure they're in the right house before they start this. I'm going to skip down a little bit here. December recalls a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in Spring Hill, Tennessee that went on the market in April 2017. In the strong, fast-growing market, the seller had 4 bids on the house within hours. The high bid, $208,000, came from a home with a child looking for their first house, according to December. Quote, American Homes for Rent matched their offer, all cash, end of quote. So guess who got the home? American Homes did. Mm-hmm. It was the 7th house that they had purchased on that street. In fact, since 2010, 700 houses in Spring Hill, Tennessee have been purchased by just 4 companies, including American Homes for Rent and Progress Residential. Together, the 4 owned about 5% of the houses in town. As a result, rent skyrocketed. When December visited with the town's vice mayor, Bruce Hull, in April 2017, he was told this, quote, it hasn't been that long since you could get a 3-bedroom, 2-bath for $1,000 a month, end of quote. Those houses were now closer to $1,800 a month, and this was done by design. And it just goes on and on from there. Like I said, as soon as I finish reading this book, I haven't even cracked it open yet. As soon as I do, I need to get Ryan December on this show and talk about this in great detail.
Absolutely. Yeah, you just reminded me of a story I was reading, an older one. It was about the gentrification, but it was 10 years old, and it did not age well. So.
Oh, geez. Well, that's kind of not a surprise there.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll keep you updated on trying to get Ryan December on this show. Real quick, before we move on to anything else, we have an update from last week. We told you a story last week about a 43-year-old man who was shot in Grand Ledge. He had walked into a Quality Dairy store in Diamondale, was asked to put on a mask, and stabbed a 77-year-old man in the store. Quality Dairy issued a statement because there had been original misinformation in the state police media advisory on this. Here's what Quality Dairy wrote on their official Facebook page. Regarding an unfortunate incident in our Diamondale store earlier this week, some facts of that incident have not been reported accurately, and we would like to clear them up here. During a violent attack, a 77-year-old man was injured, though he was an innocent bystander. The assailant had been asked by a staff member to wear a mask in the store, and he refused. He then attacked the other gentleman. At no point did the injured gentleman address the assailant in any way. Contrary to some reporting, the injured man did not confront the assailant, follow him outside, or even speak to him. We are praying for this gentleman and his family, as well as our staff who are working to understand. Thank you, Quality Dairy.
Well, I don't know about you, Darren, but it sounds to me like there was some media propaganda going on.
Yeah,
whoever put out that first story.
Originally it was the state police. When they issued the press release, they had the wrong information.
That makes more sense.
So then the media picked up on it, and then once they got the real story, they're like, oh, well, we need to fix this. So they started issuing retractions and clarifications to the story. So
that's interesting.
Good on them. And speaking of the media, let's get into this story, because you hadn't heard about this. This is a surprise here. John Heiner writes this for MLive, and this is published July 23rd. MLive is a Michigan media group. They own about 8 newspapers across the state of Michigan, including the Grand Rapids Press, the Muskegon Chronicle, the Bay City Times, the Saginaw Times, the Ann Arbor News, among others. So they have changed their policy. Let me read this here. Bob Johnson is a reporter in his hometown of Saginaw, a majority black and Hispanic community that is home to one of MLive's 8 local news operations. He knows the people and they know him, so they're not shy offering criticism about our coverage of minority concerns. Johnson, who is black, said, quote, "The community might see it one way, but since we know our industry and our company, we know it's unintentional." End of quote. But he adds, quote, "After a while, the community doesn't want to hear the excuses we're giving them. At some point, we have to start bringing it up. These problems are here. This is how they are perceiving us." End of quote. He's right. We have to listen, and we have to change. That is a theme across America in this tumultuous period of social justice awakening that has occurred since George Floyd was killed by police officers in Minneapolis on May 25th. As a direct outgrowth of listening to our communities and to our own employees, we have one immediate response. We are discontinuing the routine use of mugshots to accompany stories about crimes. This is big news here.
Yeah, it really is. They depend on this form of propaganda to perpetuate the racism.
Yeah. Let me continue. We will use these stories in limited situations, such as crimes involving public figures, when a suspect in a serious crime is a fugitive, or as a part of courtroom coverage of high-profile cases. But it has become clear to us that the use of mugshots, an old tradition in journalism, has serious problems that were becoming glaringly obvious. Mugshots were on the mind of a black woman from Saginaw who approached Johnson last weekend. Quote, "She was upset. Why do we always report bad news and use mugshots of minority people all the time? She said, how about not using mugshots at all? What happens when these people are not convicted of a crime? What happens if their charges are dropped? Their mugshots are always associated with that crime now." End of quote. Mugshots are problematic for a host of reasons. Among them, police agencies have different policies about making mugshots available, which means the use is hit and miss rather than comprehensive. Mugshots inherently imply guilt, regardless of whether suspects ultimately are convicted and are published well before trial. Different crimes have different news value and different impacts on a community. Using mugshots indiscriminately gives undue equivalence, all before a suspect has due process. Google has a long reach. As the woman in Saginaw expressed to Johnson, these images are attached to a crime story for as long as the internet exists. For this reason, we will continue discussions on how to best handle archived stories with mugshots. Coverage of crime in the court system is integral to understanding our communities. We have no plans to change our commitment to reporting those stories. But how we present those stories contributes to the impression that is created of a community. Practices that we have followed for decades are due for a fresh look. Upon such review, we have determined that the reflexive use of mugshots does more to foster negative perceptions than to provide understanding to our readers. Johnson said, quote, "The George Floyd death sparked something in America. I think we're rounding a curve right now and really starting to look life through the lens of being a minority. We're not the community's PR team. We have to hold the mirror up to the community. But there are some instances where we could, so some things are a little better." End of quote. We all can. In future columns, I will continue the conversation on how we are becoming more responsive to our diverse communities across the state. In the meantime, share your thoughts with John Heiner. His email address is editor@mlive.com. So, isn't that something? I never thought I'd hear the day where a newspaper would stop running mugshots.
But
indiscriminately.
Yeah. I wonder if it's because things have finally started to switch, though, where it gets a little bit harder to paint the picture with mugshots because white people are just not what we've painted them to be.
Oh, you mean like these white people? Jim Salter writes this for the Associated Press out of St. Louis. This is dated July 20th. St. Louis's top prosecutor Monday charged a husband and wife with felony unlawful use of a weapon for displaying guns during a racial injustice protest outside their mansion.
Oh, yeah, those white people. Exactly like those white people.
Mark and Patricia McCloskey, who are white, are both personal injury attorneys in their 60s. Circuit Attorney Kim Garner told the Associated Press that their actions risked creating a violent situation during an otherwise nonviolent protest last month. So here's what was going on. A group of protesters went into a gated community, which I freaking hate gated communities.
Oh my gosh, why do you get a gated community? Why is it private?
Exactly. So they were marching in this gated community to arrive at the home of the mayor of St. Louis because the mayor had days earlier started reading off the names and addresses of people who were saying defund the police on social media.
Oh no.
Yeah. By the way, Democrat.
Of course.
Of course. Because let me skip a little bit here. St. Louis, like many cities across the country, has seen demonstrations in the weeks since George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, and the McCloskey's home was initially incidental to the demonstration on June 28th. Several hundred people were marching to the home of Democratic Mayor Lyda Krewson, a few blocks from McCloskey's home. Krewson had angered activists by reading on Facebook Live the names and addresses of some who had called for defunding the police.
I generally give my name and address when I call for defunding the police, so go ahead and try with me.
Yeah. So the protesters, on their way to Mayor Krewson's house, went past the McCloskey's home, which is a $1.1 million home, and he comes out with
some kind of rifle.
Semi-automatic rifle, I believe an AR. She comes out with a semi-auto pistol with her finger on the trigger.
Like it's a water gun. Holding it like it is a water gun.
Yes. Told him, get out of here, you're trespassing, etc., etc. Well, here's the thing. So they ended up getting arrested. They're being charged with a Class E felony. They could get up to 4 years in prison. Do you want to know what the prosecutor is recommending in this case?
I'm going to say a fine.
Community service.
Oh, that's more than I expected. Prosecutors are great.
The couple, again, claims that they were legally defending their home under castle doctrine, etc., etc. Yeah. We'll get to that. Several Republican leaders have condemned Gardner's investigation, including Donald Trump, Missouri Governor Mike Parson, and Senator Josh Hawley, who has urged Attorney General William Barr to undertake a civil rights investigation of Gardner because white people are being discriminated against.
Obviously. I mean, geez, we've been through so much.
Yeah. Governor Parson said in a radio interview that he would likely pardon the couple if they were charged and convicted. Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt said in a statement Monday that he filed a brief requesting that the charges be dismissed under the state's Castle Doctrine. Schmidt said in a statement, quote, "The right to keep and bear arms is given the highest level of protection in our Constitution and our laws, including the Castle Doctrine. This provides broad rights to Missourians who are protecting their property and lives from those who wish to do them harm." End of quote. No, the top one, the highest level, is the First Amendment. That's why it's first.
Duh.
Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, said on Twitter that the charges were, quote, "an unacceptable abuse of power and threat to the Second Amendment," end of quote. He called for a federal civil rights investigation into the St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office to, quote, "determine whether this investigation and impending prosecution violates this family's constitutional rights," end of quote. Gardner said that Trump, Parson, and others are attacking her to distract from, quote, "their failed approach to the COVID-19 pandemic," end of quote, and other issues. Oh, like having Bortec round up people, no Miranda, no identification, no nothing.
Not tell anybody where they're at. Give them no trial and keep them as long as they want.
Yeah.
That's constitutional.
Yeah, exactly. Let me continue. The McCloskeys live on a private street called Portland Place. A police report said the couple heard a loud commotion and saw a large group of people break an iron gate marked with "no trespassing" and private street signs.
Oh, no.
A protester, the Reverend Daryl Gray, said the gate was open and that protesters did not damage it.
I believe it.
McCloskey confronted protesters with a semi-automatic rifle, screamed at them, and pointed the weapon at them, according to a probable cause statement from police officer Curtis Bergdorf. The statement said Patricia McCloskey then entered with a semi-automatic handgun, yelling at protesters to go and pointing the gun at them. Protesters feared, quote, "being injured due to Patricia McCloskey's finger being on the trigger, coupled with her excited demeanor," end of quote. The Associated Press asked Gardner why the Castle Doctrine did not apply in this case. She declined to discuss the case because it's an ongoing case.
And because the Castle Doctrine involves threat, right? Imminent threat of danger, and there wasn't one.
Mm-hmm. Nope, they just perceived a danger because they're a bunch of racist and whatever you want to call it.
I don't know if they
My
perceived
opinion.
a danger, if they just perceived a good time. I think a lot of those people just are, they want that.
You know, that's a good point. I never thought about that. But yeah, you might be onto something on that one. Oh, gosh. So let me continue here. Trump spoke by phone with Governor Parson last week to criticize Gardner's investigation. Parson, when he was in the legislature, co-authored Missouri's Castle Doctrine law that justifies deadly force for those who are defending their homes from intruders. He has said that the McCloskeys had every right to protect their property, but they weren't even on their property.
And hold on, his last name is Parson?
Yes.
Isn't that one of the biggest defense contractors? Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah. The McCloskeys' attorney Schwartz said that the couple support the First Amendment right of every citizen to have their voice and opinion heard. This right, however, must be balanced with the Second Amendment and Missouri law, which entitle each of us to protect our home and family from potential threats. And, you know, but my Second Amendment rights trump your first. No, they don't. No, there was no threat. They were not on property. It's not a Castle Doctrine issue. Sorry, Michigan's got the Castle Doctrine.
Yep.
Gardner, St. Louis's first black circuit attorney, has been at odds with some in the St. Louis establishment since her election in 2016. Most notably, her office charged then-Governor Eric Greitens with felony invasion of privacy in 2018 for allegedly taking a compromising photo of a woman during an extramarital affair. The charge was eventually dropped, but Greitens resigned in June 2018. A private investigator Gardner hired to investigate the claims against Greitens was later indicted for perjury for allegedly lying during his deposition. His case is pending. Garner has also butted heads with police leaders, especially after she developed an exclusion list of more than 24 officers who were barred from serving as primary witnesses in criminal cases over what Garner called credibility concerns. The move angered Police Chief John Hayden, who is also black, but they're all blue, so that doesn't matter.
Exactly.
In January, Garner filed a federal lawsuit accusing the city, the police union, and others of a coordinated and racist conspiracy aimed at forcing her out of office. The lawsuit also accused entrenched interest of intentionally impeding her efforts to change racist practices. Several black leaders in St. Louis have expressed support for Garner, including Democratic U.S. Representative William Lacey Clay, who has said protesters, quote, should never be subject to the threat of deadly force, whether by individuals or by the police, end of quote. Well, he's right.
Very true.
Problem is, now they got to deal with the Border Patrol.
Yeah, and Department of Homeland Security and, U.S. Marshals, between the sheriff, the state police, their city police. It's insane.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And as proof of that, we have this story. This is Ken Klippenstein writing for The Nation magazine. This is dated July 17th. For days, federal agents in unmarked cars have reportedly been snatching Portland protesters off the streets. Thursday of last week, video emerged of federal agents clad in camouflage fatigues and unspecified police patches apprehending one such demonstrator and placing him in an unmarked vehicle. And by the way, I believe this was the person that later did an interview with Oregon Public Radio.
Yes.
And confirmed everything. Social media lit up with speculation about the intentions and the identity of these agents. A memo consisting of internal talking points for the federal agency responsible for the arrest, customs, and border protection, and obtained exclusively by The Nation, provides some answers and raises even more questions. Dated July 1st, the memo is titled Public Affairs Guidance, CBP Support to Protect Federal Facilities and Property, and marked for official use only. It describes a special task force created by the Department of Homeland Security in response to Donald Trump's executive order on protecting American monuments, memorials, and statues, and combating recent criminal violence. That task force, the Protecting American Communities Task Force, or PACT, has been tasked not only to assess civil unrest, but also to surge resources to protect against it. The Portland arrest of Mark Pettibone, first reported by Oregon Public Broadcasting, followed several similar arrests involving officers from a Border Patrol Tactical Unit, BORTAC, CBP's equivalent of a SWAT team, as well as the U.S. Marshal Special Operations Group. A CBP spokesman confirmed to The Nation that CBP agents were responsible for the arrest, pointing to authorities under the Protecting American Communities Task Force. The spokesperson said, quote, violent anarchists have organized events in Portland over the last several weeks with willful intent to damage and destroy federal property, as well as injure federal officers and agents. These criminal actions will not be tolerated. End of quote. Really? Yeah. The Talking Points memo identifies a series of potential questions, including many of those being asked in response to the Portland arrests. In several cases, it instructs CBP officials not to answer them, citing operational security. For example, in response to questions about whether CBP personnel are being deployed, the memo says, quote, it would not be appropriate to discuss law enforcement operational specifics which could jeopardize operational security, end of quote. As for questions about when CBP personnel will be deployed and for how long, the memo states, quote, we do not give out operational specifics. However, we hope the support will be short-term just for the 4th of July weekend, end of quote. The CBP spokesman, however, did not give any indication the operation would be coming to an end. He said, quote, the Department of Homeland Security and its components will continue to work tirelessly to reestablish law and order, end of quote. I'm just going to stop there for a minute. This is right out of the Republican 1980 handbook of Ronald Reagan. We scare all the old folks with security and safety issues so that we can become a bunch of thugs.
Yes, and at the same time, we get them to fight amongst themselves over things like like masks and, things that they feel, are controlling the narrative so that they feel like they have some control by going out and arguing with their neighbors. But in reality, their neighbors aren't the problem. And it's all designed that way to keep us fighting with each other so we don't notice what's happening all around us.
Yeah. The quote here said violent anarchists organized the events in Portland over the last several weeks.
Property damage is not violence. I cannot say this enough. I can't.
Yup. And it's not even the anarchist. Why?
Oh, no.
This is Ryan Deverell writing for The Intercept. This is dated July 15th. As protests against police violence spread to every state in the U.S. and dramatic images flooded in from cities across the country, Donald Trump and his attorney general spun an ominous story of opportunistic leftists exploiting a national trauma to sow chaos and disorder. They were the anti-fascists known as Antifa, and according to the administration, they were domestic terrorists who would be policed accordingly. But while the White House beat the drum for a crackdown on the leaderless movement on the left, law enforcement offices across the country were sharing detailed reports of far-right extremists seeking to attack the protesters and police during the country's historic demonstrations. That is according to a trove of newly leaked documents.
Oh my. I gotta jump in here for a second and bring up this point, because as frustrating as this is, especially with the way that people on the right are treating people on the left right now, we have to understand that if things get the way they look like they're going, we're going to end up in a situation where each other are all we have. Mm-hmm. That's it. And it might be a Republican that is the only one that can help you. So don't burn your bridges now. Understand that we're all struggling with the same things and people handle it differently, but ultimately we might need each other. So just try to reason with them and not shut them out completely if possible.
But if it's not possible,
that's fine too. Don't kill yourself in the toxicity or the foolery. Like, there's no reason for that. But at the same time, just remember that there's going to come a time when, and even if it's not a government thing, but if things get bad, sometimes those are the people that are there, and there's things you can't agree on. So just, push the foolery aside.
Yeah. Let me continue this article from The Intercept. Among the steady stream of threats from the far right were repeated encounters between law enforcement and heavily armed adherents of the so-called Boogaloo movement, which welcomes armed confrontation with cops as means to trigger civil war. We're already there, folks.
Yep.
With much of the U.S. policing apparatus on the hunt for Antifa instigators, those violent aspirations appear to have materialized in a string of targeted attacks in California that left a federal protective services officer and a sheriff's deputy dead and several other law enforcement officials wounded. The cache of law enforcement materials was recently hacked and posted online under the title Blue Leaks, providing an unprecedented look at the communications between state, local, and federal law enforcement in the face of the nationwide protests. In an analysis of nearly 300 documents that reference Antifa, The Intercept found repeated instances of Antifa and left-wing protesting activities cast in cartoonishly grim terms, alongside more substantive reports of lethal right-wing violence and threats that have received scant mention from top Trump administration officials. Hina Shamsi, director of the ACLU's National Security Project, told The Intercept, quote, "Throughout the documents, you see counterterrorism agencies using extremism so broadly as to mean virtually anything that encompasses dissent. There are instances in which people engaging in white supremacist violence get the benefit of the doubt as potential lone offenders, while people of color and those who dissent against government injustice are smeared as threats with guilt by association." End of quote.
That is a great way to sum that up.
Folks, the ACLU is your biggest help.
They're all we have, honestly, and I am critical of everybody, but I am so grateful for the ACLU.
Mm-hmm. Michael German, a former FBI agent specializing in domestic terrorism and current fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice, said the materials were rife with examples of law enforcement intelligence being politicized in ways that endangered both protesters and police alike. German told The Intercept, quote, "Terrorism is distinguished from other violence by its political nature, and as a result, counterterrorism is often highly politicized as well. Here we're seeing where this politicization of counterterrorism is being reflected in intelligence documents that are going out and are intended to inform state and local law enforcement on the ground. End of quote. Here he added this, quote, overall, what you see is a strange sensationalization of the Antifa threats, and that doesn't exist when looking at the Boogaloo documents. End of quote. German argued that the impulse to paint both sides of the political spectrum with the same brush, despite the fact that only the far right is actively killing people, is among the most dangerous features of modern American law enforcement. In his review of the documents produced in response to the recent protest, German said purported threats from Antifa were routinely overblown, often framed vandalism as terrorism, and were typically absent of concrete evidence of serious criminal activity. Again, property damage is not violence.
I have a quote here from the ACLU.org. It's
Yes.
from 2011, okay, and it was when President Obama passed the NDAA, which was the
National Defense Authorization Act.
Yep, and obviously, if most people remember this or have heard about it recently, but that is what allows them to incarcerate people indefinitely, basically without a charge or a trial. So the ACLU was quoted in 2011 saying, President Obama's action today is a blight on his legacy because he will forever be known as the president who signed indefinite detention without charge or trial into law, said Anthony D. Romero, ACLU executive director. The statute is particularly dangerous because it has no temporal or geographic limitations and can be used by this and future presidents to militarily detain people captured far from any battlefield. The ACLU will fight worldwide detention authority wherever we can, be it in court, in Congress, or internationally.
Mm-hmm. Folks, the ACLU is your last hope at this point, in my opinion.
And even they are having a really hard time. If you didn't see the story they released in Michigan about the Grand Rapids Police Department texting a city juror during trial to tell them not to vote guilty and to try to get them to push the only black juror off the jury. The organization to break that story was the ACLU, and the local press did everything they could not to let it get out, and it really hasn't spread very far because of that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the prosecutor said, oh, there's more to this.
But they won't tell us what.
But they won't tell you what it is.
And ACLU did not issue a retraction, so I absolutely believe what they're saying.
Yep, I certainly do too. Let me continue the story here. He said, quote, it's chatter, it's intelligence reporting suggests, end of quote. On June 2nd, for example, the Department of Homeland Security circulated a tweet to law enforcement agencies across the country reporting that Antifa was stashing bricks to fuel protests, which, by the way, that's also a load of horse right there.
Absolute horse.
Never happened. It never happened. Folks, you need to really dig deep into things and look for yourselves and don't just take what the media says.
Yeah, it's real interesting, the buildings that did have every single window broken that were maybe nowhere near the riots, but maybe they just wanted that insurance claim.
Yeah. Continuing, the intelligence made its way to a law enforcement fusion center in Maine. Last week, Mainer magazine tracked down the original source of the tweet, a far-right pro-Trump biker who goes by the name The Wolfman, who claimed that Facebook kept deleting his brick planting evidence, quote, because they are BLM supporters, end of quote.
Oh, my.
I wish I had the old song Clap for the Wolfman queued up here, but apparently that's not going to happen. Oh, let me continue. Even if Antifa were staging bricks, German said, quote, you have these heavily armed groups right there who have a much more direct and lengthy history of violence than anything Antifa or anarchist involved does. End of quote. This is an FBI agent saying this, folks.
And I mean, the big picture here is, what is the Black Lives? It's a movement of people saying, please stop killing us. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's about as non-violent as it gets. The whole point is to stop the violence. So to label these people as terrorists, that is extremism.
Exactly. Unlike the information circulated about Antifa, much of the intelligence reporting in the Blue Leaks documents regarding threats from the far right is tightly focused on specific events, German noted. Quote, that's the way it should be, end of quote. Far-right extremists have been targeting and killing law enforcement, not to mention members of the general public, for generations. And I'll stop real quick there just to jar some people's memories. All you got to do is Google the name Alan Berg. I've talked about him on this show repeatedly for years. He was a left-wing Jewish man who was a radio host in Denver who would rail against these white supremacist groups. He ended up getting murdered in his driveway, execution style.
Did they hold anybody accountable?
They finally did many years later.
Wow.
Yeah. Left-wingers get murdered. Right-wingers get away with it.
Oh, I know. I mean, I have a, whenever you're done, I have an article that illustrates perfectly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Let me continue real quick here. German explained, and in fact, the government's own documents show that those ideas were percolating in extremist corners of the right at the same time that Trump and U.S. Attorney General William Barr were preparing to crack down on the left.
Of course.
While Antifa has been a right-wing boogeyman for years, the administration's rhetoric ramped up in late May, with Trump tweeting that he would designate the movement as a terrorist organization. Barr followed the tweet with a Department of Justice statement reporting that federal investigators would work to, quote, identify criminal organizers and instigators, end of quote, who were hijacking the protest, and warning that, quote, the violence instigated and carried out by Antifa and other similar groups in connection with the rioting is domestic terrorism and will be treated accordingly, end of quote. In the weeks since Barr's statement was issued, The Intercept has published accounts of FBI agents in multiple states targeting individuals with a perceived relationship to Antifa for interviews and potential informant work. Meanwhile, the Trump Make America Great Again Committee, an official fundraising arm of Trump, has been running campaign ads urging donors to send money to show support for the administration's Antifa enforcement campaign. Yet the leaked materials show that on May 29th, 2 days before Trump tweeted that Antifa would be labeled a terrorist organization and Barr issued his DOJ statement, Trump's own DHS analyst issued an open-source intelligence report detailing how a white supremacist channel on Telegram, an encrypted messaging service, was encouraging followers to capitalize on the unrest by targeting the police with Molotov cocktails and firearms.
What?
A source in the group, titled National Accelerationist Revival, wrote on May 27th, quote, the use of firearms greatly influences the scale and intensity of these events, end of quote. National Accelerationist Revival advised followers to break police lines, quote, with cocktails, chainsaws, and firearms, end of quote. Gosh. So these are the right-wingers saying this, not the left. At the time, DHS reported the group included more than 3,400 subscribers. The source went on, quote, looting and shoplifting are both cool and whites should be doing it way more. When the laws no longer benefit you, break them for personal gain. If you don't feel like buying something, steal it. If you don't feel like driving slow, drive fast. If you don't like someone, hurt them. We ought to revel in the destruction of the police state. It is just as necessary to break down the police state and the system of control as it is to spread racial hatred, end of quote.
Oh, my.
So these are right-wingers saying this, that we need to break the police state. Folks, you need to really read this stuff.
It's a crazy world we're living in. And I don't understand what it's going to take, because I was comparing this to another issue that's obviously a big deal right now, the gentrification. But so 10 years ago, I found this article the other day, and it's great because it totally illustrates what the problem is here and how they're telling us to wait and hold off and acting as if we're being irrational and extreme for just not wanting them to keep killing black people. Well, 10 years ago, they had the same outlook when there was a group of people who were upset about the gentrification. So specifically Wealthy Street. I find this article, and the headline it really sums it up. It was written by Garrett Ellison in 2011, April of 2011. It says, neighbors who fought to reclaim Wealthy Street from drugs and gangs say vandals fighting so-called gentrification don't understand.
Yeah, and this is Wealthy Street in Grand Rapids, where Jack and I have talked about the gentrification that has happened on the southeast side of Grand Rapids.
Oh, it is horrible, and you can see it right now that it's happened. If you've been down to the Donkey or the Winchester, anywhere over here, you can see how different it is and has changed over the last 15 years. But I want to read you this one paragraph because it totally paints where we're at today, too. So this is a quote. It says, taped to the front door of each business is a yellow flyer that shouts, "Please help the police," with a promise of a $20,000 reward for information that leads to the arrest of an anti-gentrification terrorist threatening the area. They offered a $20,000 reward, you guys, 10 years ago. They called him a terrorist because somebody was spray painting because they were upset about the gentrification and were spray painting regarding the gentrification. So here we sit 10 years later, and I look out at Wealthy Street, where there was at least 6 shootings here this year already, 3 of them in the last 2 weeks. And that is those are just the ones I'm positive of in my head right now. So the drugs and the guns aren't gone.
No.
What's happened is these people who came in and gentrified the area have made millions and millions of dollars in the last 10 years with buildings that they didn't pay for. I mean, this article goes on and it discusses how they were all built with Renaissance zone tax credits and historical preservation tax credits. They didn't even build these. They've sat back and made this money and encouraged the police to go out and target the black people around the area to keep them safe. And what has happened to the black community? What has happened to the people that built this city? They can't afford to live here anymore.
No.
So that's what's going to happen ultimately if we let this keep happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, we're going to look back in 10 years and go, well, all they've done is kill 5,000 more black people. So that's why we really have to make sure that we get change this time.
Yeah, and the gentrification has moved out of the southeast side. It's still there, but they've spread to the northeast side of Grand Rapids thanks
it's
to
going
Medical
further
Mile.
south right now from here, but yeah, that's basically gone south of where I'm at.
And then also the northwest side of Grand Rapids has been gentrified as well.
Oh, yeah.
Rentals have gone up big time on the northwest side of Grand Rapids.
Well, the scary part, even go to the rural areas. You can't go to Greenville, Sparta, Cedar Springs. You used to be able to get affordable places there. Everything now.
Oh, yeah.
Which ties right back to the first article you read, today.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Tell you what, let's get into this. This is Matt Baum writing for the Portland Mercury. It's an article that was published July 20th, and it says, what to do if you're kidnapped by federal officers while protesting. So let's just go ahead and get right down into it. They use the Department of State's Overseas Security Advisory Council's guide to preventing abduction by militant forces.
Oh, wow.
So this is what you use to keep yourself from getting grabbed by these SS thugs, whatever you want to call them. According to the guide, kidnappers generally keep victims under surveillance for substantial periods of time. Unpredictability is one of your best weapons. If you are grabbed while first being taken captive, if feasible, scream and move about to draw attention to yourself. In addition, leave evidence of your presence in each location. Examples include strands of hair, fingerprints, blood, bits of fingernails, etc. This can be helpful to people when trying to track where you've been taken, or it could just f*** up the Fed's deposit on their Enterprise rental car. Because that's what they've been doing. They have been getting rental cars. And
those little white vans that they use that Amazon uses, yeah, that's what they look like. They're mostly unmarked.
Yeah, and by the way, in the article it says here that none of this is legal advice, but they have a link here to legal advice from the National Lawyers Guild. And by the way, if you want to get a good taste of some more stuff from the National Lawyers Guild, I encourage you listeners to listen to the show Law and Disorder, which airs on many Pacifica radio stations, and the attorneys there are either members of or past members of the National Lawyers Guild. Check out the National Lawyers Guild website. That's nlg.org. And as far as this article goes, you're going to want to check that out as well. And again, that is the Portland Mercury. We actually have a link to that on our official website. If you go to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show, you will get that link there. So take the time and read that article, because there's a lot of good information to it. Ken Klippenstein has another article at The Nation. A bill has been introduced in Congress by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This bill would mandate that federal law enforcement officials clearly identify themselves.
Yes, please.
The bill would require on-duty federal agents to display not just the name of their agency, but also the individual agent's last name and identification number. It would also mandate a new form of oversight for the Justice Department, requiring its Inspector General to conduct routine audits to ensure compliance with the legislation. The results of those audits would then be reported to Congress. So,
this is imperative. Wherever you're at, please call for them to wear identification, because they're dressed like SWAT here, and none of them will wear a name tag or identify themselves.
Yeah, AOC is looking to help us out here.
Yeah, the GRPD actually published a statement saying they didn't wear name tags because they thought protesters were going to rip them off and use them as projectiles. That is the most pathetic excuse I've ever heard.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, we got some unbelievable stories to wrap up the show today. It's time for Off the Cuff. This first story is local. It comes out of Grand Haven, Michigan. John Tunison writes this for MLive. Police said that 56-year-old Tammy North was upset about a pizza shop's mask requirement. She went into Jet's Pizza in Grand Haven. They told her to put a mask on. She caused a stir in the store before fleeing. This happened on Thursday, July 16th. Allegedly, she approached the counter, stuck her hands underneath the plexiglass barrier, and used her fingers to make an obscene gesture to employees while speaking obscenities. She kicked a patron who tried to intervene. Out in the parking lot, she was kicking a vehicle, somebody else's, not her own. Grand Haven Department of Public Safety showed up to investigate. She got into her truck. They ordered her to stop. She backed up and rolled over the officer's foot, then led them on a chase, which ended on US 31 at Sternberg Road. She was arrested by Fruitland Township Police. She is charged with fleeing and eluding, resisting and obstructing, and disturbing the peace. The next one. This is Brad Reed writing for rawstory.com. Again, I hate using Raw Story. A woman who refused to wear a mask in a Panera Bread in Chico, California this week complained that masks can't possibly be effective in slowing the spread of the novel coronavirus because pants are not able to contain gas that is passed due to flatulence. She was told to put a mask on. Another customer said, "Put the mask on and stop being stupid." This is what she said. Quote, "You think that mask is going to protect you?" End of quote. She then pointed to her pants and said this, quote, "When you fart out your ass, you can smell it." End of quote. There's video of this. Again, that
sounds like scientific research study to me.
And then the last story is out of Roseville, California. A woman went into a Verizon store with two other people. They were told to leave because they didn't have masks on. They refused to leave the store. The store called the police. As the police were on the way there, they received a call back from the store saying that this woman had pulled her pants down and started urinating on the floor. The woman was arrested, and she's been charged with, of all things, shoplifting because they allegedly found stolen merchandise from a Dick's Sporting Goods up the street. So the idiots have gone completely cuckoo,
they
folks.
lost their damn minds.
I guess they have. Well, the way society is going, I'm surprised anybody can keep their sanity at this point.
Yeah, I'm on the edge there, but I don't know I ever was sane.
Yeah. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this week. I'm Darren Gibson.
I'm Katy Steele Brony.
And for Kristen Cook, please support independent media.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.